So we'll just give it a second here before we start. We'll just give it about 20 more seconds and then we'll get started with today's lesson. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone who's joining today. I'm Dawn Knight. I'm an English teacher from Westfield High School in Westfield, Indiana, just north of Indianapolis. And we're going to start by going over the AP exam practice from yesterday. Excuse me. Don't worry if you didn't do the lesson, it'll still be beneficial to you. But if you didn't do the practice, you might want to pause the feed here and just read through the prompt so that you know what it's about, and then you can press play and continue the lesson with us at any time. Your practice yesterday was to identify the shifts in tone in this passage and consider how the writer conveys that shift. So if you look where the orange line is, you'll see where the shift is. And here the writer shifts the way he describes the Mississippi River. There are some key details to consider that really show how he creates that shift. In the first half, you can see these areas marked in orange. First, there's an anecdote about Heisenberg, a physicist, not from Breaking Bad, someone who has a firm knowledge of hydraulics and science, talking about how he would ask Guy why relativity and why turbulence. But that turbulence is so complex a topic that even God can't describe it. And then in that little second area, there's a scientific description about the turbulence of rivers and how he understands most rivers from a very scientific, detached manner. And then the third area there indicates that what we know about most rivers doesn't pertain to the Mississippi and that it defies common understanding of turbulence. So then let's look at the second half where the shift happens. And we see the passage come alive. In this area, you can see circled in orange, the river never lies at rest. It roils, it snaps like a whip, it tries to devour itself, it whirls and foams. So here the river's personified and described as being alive and uncontrollable. And if you look at that first part that's underlined under those circled details, the river doesn't just move, it snakes seaward at 180 degrees at times, and it doesn't follow a straight or meandering path like most rivers. And then finally, in that last part that's underlined, the river doesn't just devour itself, it preys on whatever lies on the surface, sucking and scouring out holes. So the tone in the first half is scientific, it's detached, it's educated. He speaks very formally about rivers in general. It's non-emotional, it's impersonal. There's no real connection there to the subject matter. But after the shift in the second half, it's energetic and lively and passionate. His language changes as he's describing the river being alive. His attitude becomes alive and energetic and passionate about the subject. So overall, we see a lot more energy from Barry in the second half of his essay. And you might want to take a minute to pause the feed here and just do a little self-assessment. Did you find the shift? And if not, do you see it now? Did you see those details that help convey how it shifts? So feel free to pause here and assess yourself, and then you can move on with us whenever you're ready to hit play again. All right, now let's take a look at what we're doing today. Today's lesson is about creating cohesion or unity in your rhetorical analysis essay, which means we're going to be looking at some of the lessons that we've done before, but how they work together to create a unified essay. So we're going to be looking at the rhetorical situation, the line of reasoning, and commentary to explain significance and relevance, and the use of transitions. So first, a little bit about what you need to know. It's been a while since we looked at this rubric row. It's the row C of the rhetorical analysis essay. So let's take a look. We want to be on that right-hand side to earn the sophistication point for this row, which includes explaining significance and relevance, exploring the complexities or tensions of the prompt, having a style that's vivid and consistent. But let's also look at the left side here. Notice the part that's circled in orange on the left. It says responses that do not earn this point examine the rhetorical choices, but do not examine the relationships among the different choices throughout the passage. So today's lesson is really about how to examine those relationships and show cohesion by examining the relationships throughout. So how do we explain the relationships to create coherence? We're going to look at this as sort of a checklist that we're going to go through today. So remembering that we always want to start with studying the prompt and looking at what it's asking us to do, reading and annotating the passage based on knowing what that prompt is asking us to do, looking for the rhetorical situation, looking for specific choices a writer makes for a specific purpose, looking for patterns, not just kind of treasure hunting, I found a simile, but looking at those patterns of choice that a writer's making. Determining your thesis, which should directly answer the prompt, determining your claims, so those reasons that support the thesis, and then writing, using the paragraph format to guide you, using transitions, using commentary and analysis, and then thinking about contradiction and counter argument, which could be a part of your thesis or claims or in your commentary. Okay, so first it's important to study the prompt and read and annotate the passage. Remember from earlier lessons, we're looking for rhetorical situation and specific rhetorical choices that a writer makes for a specific purpose. We look for patterns in those choices and connections or relationships among them. So let's look at the rhetorical situation again from some of our previous lessons. Again, it's looking at relationships among these items. So the writer, the audience, the message. In other words, what does the writer know about the audience? What is their relationship? Is it friendly? Is it hostile? What's going on that prompted the passage to begin with? And those things kind of start showing that those relationships. And we also looked at this in one of our lessons as the rhetorical triangle, in which we have the speaker, audience, and purpose. And you notice those arrows that are on the triangle there that are really showing us this is a relationship. So what does the speaker know about the audience, and how do they use that to convey their purpose? And now let's look at the next part. In order to organize your essay, you first need a thesis. This is the first step in your line of reasoning. So everything else centers around the thesis. Remember, it should AP, answer the prompt. This answer is based on what you read and annotated and the patterns that you noticed about the rhetorical choices made for the specific purpose. And once you have the thesis, those patterns help determine your claims, or reasons why your thesis is valid. This is setting up a clear line of reasoning. So if you remember our line of reasoning lesson, that's what we're doing here. We're looking at that organization to make sure that everything's cohesive, that it's all focused back on answering the prompt. So let's look at a visual of these relationships. So you see at the top of the slide here that it says thesis statement, answer the prompt. That's what our essay then is focused on. Each of the body paragraphs is one of the claims or reasons why that thesis is valid. And you see the line that goes from the body paragraphs back to the thesis because there's a relationship there. Those claims are supporting the thesis. And then you notice we have a couple of specific pieces of evidence or examples in each of the body paragraphs to support the claim. So we're going to show how a writer does something to show how that statement, that thesis statement is happening. So You did a lesson on selecting evidence with Mrs. Velitis, and I want to take a quick look at how evidence selection also shows relationships. You see here how both pieces of evidence in each body paragraph goes back to the claim. That's what we're showing. But how do we select evidence to make sure it does that? Well, if you look at this in the April 17th lesson, you guys did some exercises that looked like this. And then this was your exam practice activity. And if you look at the top, the claim is, finally, Queen Elizabeth encourages confidence in her leadership and inspires troops to defend her kingdom by alluding to God. This is related directly to the thesis about how Queen Elizabeth made rhetorical choices to convey her capability as a leader. So this claim is related to the thesis. Then you looked for evidence that would show all elements of this claim. So if you look at the underlined parts here, she was encouraging confidence in her leadership and inspiring her troops. And she was doing that by alluding to God. So you needed to find specific evidence of her alluding to God, but that did both of those things, encouraged confidence and inspired troops. And when you did that, you discovered that the first example somewhat encouraged confidence and maybe somewhat inspired troops, but that the other two examples did a much better job of showing both confidence in leadership and inspiring troops by alluding to God. So selecting those pieces that definitely show both elements of this claim strongly supports the claim and shows that relationship between evidence and claim. And the claim supports the thesis. Okay, so this would be just one of the body paragraphs to support a thesis about specific choices that Queen Elizabeth made. Let's take a look at what this might look in that visual that we did. So our thesis would be something about how Queen Elizabeth, the choices she makes to convey her leadership. And one of the body paragraphs would be how she inspires confidence and inspires troops by alluding to God. And then we layer in the two good pieces of evidence there. So now we have a clear relationship between evidence and claim and thesis statement. I think that's what I wanted to say. Yeah. All right. So now let's look at the last part here when you're actually writing. So when we put the last pieces together and actually write the paragraphs, we also want to show the relationship among the pieces of evidence in a paragraph. And we don't want them to sound redundant or disjointed. We want to show relationships among the pieces of evidence and connect them to the claim. And we want to show how they all relate back to the thesis. So to do that, we can use that paragraph format that we talked about in our lesson on April 16th. So I showed you this basic format for what to include in the paragraph. And I included a couple of acronyms here that might help or that your teachers might already be using. So the basic format is that you have your claim, evidence, explanation of the evidence, and then a connection to the thesis. You could also use the axes, which is an assertion, example, explanation, significance, or peel was your point, your evidence, your explanation, and your link. They're all the same thing. They're all about having that claim, having evidence, explaining the evidence, and then connecting it back to thesis. So whatever works best for you. The idea here is that this helps you with that cohesion. The claim and evidence we just talked about, for example, showed that when we looked at that visual. But we're also continuing to create cohesion here with the explanation or commentary to connect the evidence to the claim and to explore the relationship among the pieces of evidence in a paragraph. So let's look at what this all means together. So here's one of the body paragraphs again, and I've layered in a little more complexity for you. So if you look at the claim, that's why the thesis is valid, one of your reasons for why you think your thesis is valid. Then we have a piece of evidence that we're going to explain with commentary, another piece of evidence, more explanation, and the connection back to the thesis. And you'll notice that layered in that we're showing where relationships are. So the claim has a relationship to the thesis, The evidence has a relationship to the claim and to each other. And then the connection at the bottom relates it back to the thesis. So in this body paragraph, we're doing all of these things to connect and tie all of these things together. You'll also notice that I have layered in gray boxes that say transition. Now, I want to keep in mind here, you don't have to have this exact same order. You may not have this many transitions, and you might have some explanation within a piece of evidence if you embed a quote, for example, into a sentence. And you might begin a piece of evidence and lead into it with some explanation, then evidence, then explanation again. But these are the basic pieces. They need to make sense together. And using transitions to connect them helps. And using some of those transition words we're going to look at right now, we've done that before as well. But these are just some of the basic transitions that indicate or can indicate relationships between pieces of evidence or to the claims, as we talked about. So, for example, if you say something like, therefore, likewise, unlike, or consequently, you're showing a relationship. Um, and you can do, like I said before, a quick online search and find more examples of transition words. This is just a short list to kind of get you started. If you search this, you'll find numerous lists like this one. But when we're thinking about our evidence and the relationships among the pieces of evidence, these transitions can be really helpful. If you have two pieces that are very similar and you don't want to sound too redundant, you might connect them with a transition like likewise, also, additionally. Um, or something like Queen Elizabeth uses ethos when she blah, blah, blah. Likewise, her comment about blah, blah, blah also appeals to their values. I know that's obnoxious. I'll stop using blah, blah, blah eventually. If you have pieces of evidence that are very different, though, you might want to use different transitions like although or while one does this one does this, but in a different way. So you're just tying those pieces together. Okay, let's look a little bit more about commentary as well. You talked about this in your lesson on the 21st. So commentary is that explanation analysis when we look at the basic format of the paragraph. It's where you're explaining how the evidence relates to the claim. And it's about showing those relationships. So in this slide, you looked at what the rubric said on the left and then what it means on the right. So let's look at it really quickly because I think you're going to see relationship or how things relate fairly often in here. So on the left, the rubric says commentary explains the significance and relevance of evidence in relation to the line of reasoning. So again, we're looking at that relationship. And the idea there is that you're examining the importance as part of your commentary. And then on the left, explains how rhetorical choices in the passage contributes to the writer's argument, purpose, or message. So here you're relating it to the rhetorical situation. And then lastly, explain how evidence supports a line of reasoning. So here you're connecting it to your claim. So in all of these, there's a relationship that's being explained through commentary. And notice it says strive for at least 2 sentences of commentary per example. That's just really to make sure that we're getting enough of the commentary, that it's not just kind of dropping in evidence and leaving it there. We want to really make sure that we get enough analysis and explanation of what the evidence means and how it relates. Okay, so let's look at this example that you looked at in that lesson. And as we do, we're going to look at how the analysis or commentary looks at the relationship. So let's read through this together. Throughout the letter, Gandhi continuously emphasizes that he intends no harm, but that his only goal is to help Britain perceive the wrong they have done to India by issuing the SALT Act, effectively doing so by including a short anecdote and emphasizing the prejudice his people face to force Lord Irwin to connect with his own people in the same way Gandhi speaks for his. Okay, so that's our claim. Gandhi begins his letter by stating his perspective clearly, acknowledging that nothing can be done without taking any risks. He asks Lord Irwin to pave the way for immediate removal of those evils because I do not seek to harm your people. I want to serve them even as I serve my own. I believe that I have always served them. Okay, so there's our first example. Now let's look at the analysis or explanation or commentary. Gandhi highlights his high values and encourages the same from the recipient of the letter. By doing so, Gandhi demonstrates that Lord Irwin can find an alternative to serving Britain even while helping India by unissuing the SALT Act. All right, so it's relating it here to this rhetorical situation and to the claim. Gandhi even states that if you cannot see your way to deal with these evils and my letter makes no appeals to your heart, then India will move on with the civil disobedience movement. Okay, there's our second example. Now let's look at the commentary. Speaking about evil in Irwin's heart evokes emotion in Irwin and allows him to see there are other ways to help India. By stating so, he outrightly pleads with Lord Irwin and asks him to relate to Gandhi. All right, so we get to the importance here and how it relates to the claim and the thesis. All right, and then the next example. Furthermore, he asks that once the British nation sees the sufferings Gandhi and his people undergo, that it will be enough to meet the stoniest hearts, subtly implying that Britain is cruel for imposing such a tax upon them. He even includes a short anecdote about serving Britain blindly until 1919. He uses a metaphor to state that even when his eyes were opened and he conceived non cooperation, he continued to serve them with equal love, further asking Lord Irwin to do the same. All right, and now let's look at the commentary. This metaphor and anecdote serve to further draw out emotion in Irwin because Gandhi is speaking about topics he can relate to. This is persuasive because it makes the SALT Act personal, not some piece of legislation Irwin issued. By his use of appealing to Irwin's emotions, he forces Lord Irwin to reconsider the India SALT Act to see what other less harmful alternatives there may be to help a nation who once blindly served them. All right, and we see all of those things again there, the importance, the rhetorical situation, and the claim. Okay, so here's our full visual again, this time with all of the pieces, and it looks a little complicated, but it's really not when you take it step by step. If you have a thesis that answers the prompt, if you have claims that support the thesis, and then if you have evidence that support the claims, and commentary and transitions to connect them, you have those relationships. You have a solid line of reasoning that those things naturally happen. All right. So we're going to look for relationships in this sample body paragraph. Take a minute to pause the feed here if you want to do the activity. You're looking for the claim, relationships to the claim, relationships to the rhetorical situation, relationships among the examples, and 4 transition words that help put them all together as well. So there's a copy of this document in the resource file in the video description if you want to print and annotate it. And we're going to go ahead and move on, and we'll take a look at what some of what you might have found here. So if you want to pause, otherwise, if you want to move on with us, we're going to take a look at it now. Okay, so the thesis here was that Patrick Henry conveys his message that it's time to go to war against the British through imagery, appeals to common sense, and appeals to the values of patriotism and faith in God. So if you look here, I have the claim in pink. Henry appeals to the strong patriotic and religious values of the delegates as well. So there's our claim that he's using their shared values to appeal to them. And then there's a transition word, in fact. And then immediately we move into a relationship to the claim. He starts this in the very first sentence when he mentions the patriotism of the delegates. And there we have some of that relationship with the rhetorical situation. An idea which he later builds on by telling them that armed in the holy cause of liberty and in such a country as we possess, they are invincible by any force which our enemy can send against us. So there's a relationship to the claim. These references to liberty and patriotism are used throughout the passage to appeal to their sense of duty to their country. This would be particularly powerful given the context. The very idea of the country was born out of a desire for liberty. So some relationship to the rhetorical situation there. Not only does he appeal to patriotism, but also to their religious beliefs. Okay, so there's some relationship among the two examples there. How do the two examples relate? For example, Henry uses a biblical allusion when he tells the delegates not to be betrayed with a kiss. This allusion to Jesus being betrayed by Judas illustrates one of his main points, that the British cannot be trusted, while also illustrating that the colonists are on the side of God. Again, references to God are found throughout the speech. Okay, so there's that relationships to the claim. Henry assures them, for example, that although England might have a stronger military, the colonists have God on their side. So there's that rhetorical situation again. His references to patriotism and appeals to religious beliefs are woven throughout the speech, sending a clear message to the delegates that they are obligated to their country to fight the British, but that they can be confident in the decision because they will have God on their side. All right, so there's the relationship again among the examples and what they mean together. Okay, so we looked at the rhetorical situation, line of reasoning, thesis, claims, selection of evidence, commentary, transitions, and now we're going to get to our AP exam practice today. For this one, you're doing something very similar to what we just did. You're going to read the passage and then look for claims, relationships, and transitions. And again, you can find this in our doobly-doo. I watch a lot of John Green videos, in the video description, the links. But before you leave today, we have some resources that are available that you may not know about that I want to go through really quickly. The first one is quill.org. So College Board is partnered with quill.org to provide you with some online tools to improve your writing skills. These will help you build sentences and provide immediate feedback on how to revise and strengthen your grammar and syntax. And Friday, we're going to be doing a lesson on syntax. I think this would be a great way to get prepared for that lesson, but also if you don't have a chance before then, the lesson might give you some good basic stuff that you can use, but this will give you some very more specific feedback that you can use to help. So I actually looked at this when I learned about it, and it's a really great resource for you. The other is that you now have access to practice exams on MyAP that you don't need your teacher to unlock or assign to you. So you can access these whenever you want. I'm just going to quickly walk through the steps that show you how to do that. You'll obviously first log in at myap.collegeboard.org. And then you'll scroll to see your classes and access AP Classroom and click on the thing that says AP Classroom. You will click to access AP Live classes if you want to watch more of these, or you can go to the optional practice. And then you'll click begin or continue to start one of the questions, and you'll see it says right where to click on the screen. You'll type or upload your response and click submit when you're finished. It shows you where to enter your response right on the screen. You'll click yes to continue to submit your response. And then you'll want to review it so you can see the scoring guidelines and what they were looking for. That way you know if you were probably meeting those guidelines or not. And then you'll scroll down to see scoring guidelines for each part. You'll revise, click submit, and then no, go ahead and submit now because you've already reviewed, and that will finish it. All right, that's it for today. I hope everyone's doing well and staying healthy. Again, just know that a lot of us care a lot about you. Okay, have a great day. Thanks, everyone.